What if your water bottle, your lipstick, even the couch that you're sitting on is exposing you to chemicals and impacting your reproductive health without you even knowing it? Why is the US so far behind other countries like Europe in protecting consumers from chemicals in our products? And what does it really mean to live clean, in air quotes, and have a safer home without falling into perfectionism and pseudoscience? Today, we're going to learn all about finding safer products and living in a safer home with author, lobbyist, and activist Lindsay Dahl. Welcome to Brave and Curious, the podcast where we deep dive into fertility, reproductive health, and wellness with science and compassion. I'm your host, Dr. Lora Shahine, a double board certified OBGYN and reproductive endocrinologist. And today I am curious about finding safer products, understanding confusing marketing, and knowing how to advocate for better consumer health. And I am so excited to introduce you to our guest today, Lindsay Dahl. She is someone whose work has likely touched your life, but you may not realize it. She started off as an incredible lobbyist and advocate in Minnesota, where she passed the very first laws restricting BPA in bottles and sippy cups. She's gone on to pass several consumer safety and safer product laws throughout the United States in her work as a lobbyist and a fearless advocate. After a decade of public policy, Lindsay turned her focus to business, where she led mission and advocacy at Beautycounter, where she led programs that transformed the beauty industry. Today, she serves as the Chief Impact Officer at Ritual, a science-first vitamin and supplement company where she continues to drive change through sustainability, traceability, and advocacy. Lindsay's new book, Cleaning House: The Fight to Rid Our Homes of Toxic Chemicals, is not just a call to action, but it's deeply personal and often funny, relatable stories of a mom who's trying to navigate buying products for her own home. Lindsay's new book, Cleaning House: The Fight to Rid Our Homes of Toxic Chemicals, is not only a call to action, but a valuable resource for anyone that wants to learn more about the products they're bringing into their home and how to make them safer. Lindsay, I am so happy to connect with you today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to have this conversation.
Absolutely. I have followed you for so long. We've connected with our work at Beautycounter. I love seeing what you're doing at Ritual. And now you have this incredible book, this resource that I have been so excited to luckily already be able to use a little bit. In this book, you open up with a scene about taking your kids to Target and some of the choices that you're making. I'm just curious, why did you start your story there? What was the motivation, and how did that kind of open up your world to what we need to focus on?
So the opening of the scene in Target, I intentionally started there for a couple of different reasons. The first of which is I think it's highly relatable. Mama to young kids, I'm trying to get in and out. I know I'm going to be distracted by their requests for different things. And I also really wanted to start the story there to immediately cue to the reader that this is going to be a story. If I've learned anything in my years as a lobbyist and a grassroots organizer, it's that people do remember stories and they relate to them, and they don't remember facts, myself included. I can never exactly remember the nuances of some particular fact, but I do remember stories. And so I wanted people to see, because this was a very real experience that I had, of what it means in 2025 for me to walk down the aisles of Target and to both see how far we've come, because it is tremendous. Like, the shelves are safer than they were 20 years ago. And I want people to know that right up front. And I also want to start to preview some of the themes I'm going to talk about in the book of a lot of work that we still have yet to do. And so I felt like this opening story was hopefully a compelling way to connect to the reader. And the final reason is to really just showcase how ridiculous it is that we are placing this extra thing on primarily busy moms' to-do list when we really should not have to be worrying about toxic chemical pollution in our homes and the air we breathe or the water we drink.
Yeah, and we expect that what we see on the shelves is just automatically going to be safe, that somebody else has done the work for us. And I feel like there really is, unfortunately, a burden on consumers to teach themselves about these things. And certainly, as a fertility doctor and helping people try to build their families, I have a very captive audience. A lot of people who are listening right now are probably trying to build their families. And I'm just curious, and I know that people would want to know from you, what do you think about some of the most harmful chemicals for reproductive health?
So, the first question, of course, is to always look at what the science says. And thankfully, there is a lot of science, specifically looking at where we have the biggest opportunities to prevent exposure, especially when it comes to reproductive health. And the largest class of chemicals that you talk about frequently, thankfully, are endocrine disruptors, so hormone disruptors. They also happen to be a body of chemicals that, while they behave in different ways. So for example, there's multiple different types of phthalates. They don't always have the same health effects or impacts. Same with bisphenols, bisphenol A or bisphenol S, you may have heard of. This broad class of hormone disruptors, there is a lot of scientific consensus that shows us that the exposures we have to a lot of these chemicals through our everyday consumer products at the levels that we are exposed to should call us to question the use of them in the first place. And so, like the Endocrine Society, the professional organization for endocrinologists, has not created not one, but two different consensus statements to say, look, there's enough science. There's, hundreds of scientific research papers dating really back to the 1930s that show us that a lot of these different chemicals that disrupt our hormones happened at really low levels, which kind of flips what we learned in school on its head, which is why it's really important for there to be scientific consensus for this particular class of chemicals. And the good news is, and we can dive into this a little bit deeper, is that there's also very easy ways to avoid some of these chemicals in our homes. And we know through biomonitoring data that making these consumer choices does directly impact and reduce the level of these different hormone disruptors in our bodies.
Yeah, I love that. I am often doing a lot of initial awareness when my patients are asking me, like, oh, what lifestyle things can I do to improve my fertility, decrease my risk of miscarriage? And I'm always talking about nutrition, sleep, stress management, exercise. But I do think about choices in toxins and chemicals that we're taking in. And I'm sometimes introducing it, but I think honestly, from a lot of the work that you've done and increasing awareness and other people, the information is out there, but also it can feel so overwhelming. You can kind of get shut down a little bit and be like, oh my gosh, this is so bad. Like, it's so unregulated that I might as well just forget about it because it just feels overwhelming. And so I love that you brought up, and I do talk to my patients, you can't completely eliminate exposure, but small things that you can do in your everyday life can dramatically decrease your exposure and get you out of these, like, in the research studies, like the third and fourth quartile of exposure levels in your system is what's really harmful, but you can get down. And let's just go ahead, share some of those key things that you think, like initial steps that people could take to decrease exposure.
Yep. So I'll give you four that are kind of highest priority, largest exposure. So if you're kind of hitting these four, you're going to really cover a lot of bases. The first of which is personal care products. So thankfully, there's a bunch of really good beauty and personal care brands that are actively formulating without various different hormone disrupting compounds, which mostly make their way into beauty products through the fragrances that are used in the scents. So you don't have to go in for a fragrance-free option. I would look for products that are certified by EWG verified or made safe. If you're looking for kind of a one-stop shop, the retailer Credo Beauty both has an online and in-store, and they have a very robust list of compounds, including endocrine disruptors, EDCs, that are prohibited from all of the brands that sell on their shelves. So that's like a really good starting point. And the other thing, especially when you think about beauty, is to be mindful of and I typically tell people just skip getting your nails done. Even if it's like 7 free or 10 free nail polish, just skip having your nails done if that's something that's important to you while you're pregnant. And same for getting your hair colored or dyed or treated if you have the opportunity to not do that while you're in the trying to conceive phase or while pregnant. That's generally a good rule of thumb. So that's the like first kind of meaty category. The second is to really focus on your cookware. So making sure that you're using cookware that doesn't have fluorinated compounds. People may have heard of PFAS, which are nicknamed forever chemicals. They're also hormone disrupting chemicals. And the biggest route of exposure in our kitchens is through nonstick pots and pans. So if you have those, it's better to opt for stainless steel or cast iron, which now are really affordable and widespread. You can find them most places.
And they last forever as opposed to the chemicals. Like I have like this cast iron skillet, from my grandmother, in the family. And it just like, it only gets better and better. So I like to tell my patients, like, buy one pan that's going to last forever. Don't use something that like these chemicals are going to last forever. And they're kind of like, it's a little reminder. So I love this. Personal care products.
Yes.
Cookware. Okay. What's next?
Next is mattresses and couches. So the biggest offenders there are both flame retardants and forever chemicals can be used on couches. If you see advertising to make something kind of stain or spill resistant, that's usually a red flag to avoid it. Because the same thing that makes your eggs slip in that nonstick pan is the same thing that lets the wine roll off and not stain your white couch. But thankfully, most couches that are built after 2015, well, all of them are legally required to have a label on the bottom of the couch or the armchair indicating whether or not flame retardants are present in that particular couch. And many, because of this transparency effort, do not, which is, again, great. You don't have to make the trade-off of a more expensive couch. IKEA, for example, more affordable price point is flame retardant free. And then same for mattresses. There's a bunch of different great mattresses at varying price points that do not use flame retardants. And if you think about, again, a priority time, because you spend so much time in your bed inhaling those flame retardants, that kind of off gas.
Yeah. I have a question for you about that. So tell me if this is wrong, because I feel like I heard it somewhere or maybe read it somewhere, but is the reason that there was such a push to having flame retardant on couches and in beds was back when most people were smoking in bed and that they would fall asleep and you're worried about setting the house on fire, and that it was a real push even from the tobacco industry to try to help not make smoking so bad. I don't know if I'm now getting into like conspiracy theories, but
no,
is there
Laura,
any...
this is squarely not in a conspiracy theory. This is widely documented and was, it's been published, and this kind of the tactics of the flame retardant industry were, actually the Chicago Tribune wrote a multi-piece investigative, they won an award for it. So I actually cover this story in my book because it's like, you can have crafted a more salacious, it's like a movie should be made out of this. But instead of, the original problem was that a lot of people were smoking back in the 70s and drinking heavily and falling asleep or passing out in an armchair with a lit cigarette. So instead of removing the chemicals from cigarettes that have them self-extinguish, because right now, if you light a cigarette and you put it in an ashtray, it's going to burn all the way down because there are chemicals that keep it burning, versus just removing those chemicals. You have to actually drag the cigarette to keep it burning. Instead of removing those chemicals, the tobacco and the chemical industry teamed up to then add chemicals to all of the kind of foam couches and beds in our homes through some very minuscule but highly important law in the state of California. And so this wouldn't be a problem if flame retardants actually slowed the spread of household fires, which it's now been proven they do not.
Yeah.
And it would also not be a problem if they weren't toxic, which has also been proven to not be the case. So you've got something that was up to, sometimes 10, 11, 12 pounds of the actual overall weight of a couch were flame retardants, to give you an idea of the volume that they were being applied to the foam. And they're also highly toxic and similar to forever chemicals. Same, they're persistent, bioaccumulative, and toxic. So
Yeah.
this is a ridiculous love affair. And again, I encourage people to check it out in the book because it just goes to show, like, in so many ways, you know, industries have evolved in really great, positive ways, trying to solve problems. And yet it goes to show that some of these industries, unfortunately, the only thing they're focused on is making more money. And this is
Mm-hmm.
why we need protections in place, including our federal agencies, to hold some of these bad actors accountable.
Yeah. And tell me if I'm wrong again, but I do think a lot of these chemicals have finally been taken out of a lot of children's pajamas because that was something that was, you know, kind of at the same time it was touted to help keep your kids safe. If there's a fire, then they're, you know, not going to get as harmed. And I remember running around in the late 70s, early 80s with these little like footy,
Mm-hmm.
smelly, you
Yeah.
know, pajamas that like it was like slippers on the bottom. And I just remember they smelled so bad. And I'm like, yep, that
Yeah.
was PFAS going right into my system. It's really, really pretty interesting. So we did personal care products, cookware, mattresses, sofas. What is our fourth pillar?
So the fourth pillar would be, and this is where people can go crazy, and I don't go crazy, but to try to reduce the amount of food packaging or pre-packaged foods that you purchase. I want to be clear. I'm someone that never wades into the like don't eat processed food camp. I'm, first of all, not a nutritionist or a doctor. But what we do know is that in certain instances, the degree to which you can, for example, if you are choosing to have frozen or fresh vegetables over canned,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to reduce your exposure to different chemicals that are used in the can linings, which are unfortunately also hormone disruptors. So those are some of our largest routes of exposure to chemicals like bisphenol S, bisphenol F. These are all cousin chemicals to BPA, which you probably heard about back in the baby bottle and Nalgene water bottle era in the early 2000s. But the reason I mention packaged food, especially for this particular critical window, if someone's trying to conceive or in this kind of family planning journey, is because, again, we have biomonitoring data that shows they studied people's multiple families, blood and urine. And over the course of 3 days, they had chefs come in and made all of their food from fresh.
Mm-hmm.
And within 3 days, the BPA levels in those families on average dropped by 60% in 3 days. And so for me, what that tells us is that we do have the opportunity. We do have some semblance of control. As you pointed out, we can't control our way to safety, and that's like a fool's errand. However, it does mean that if you're intentional about, you know, maybe skipping takeout, you know, if you're eating takeout 3 times a night, that's coated in PFAS, maybe do it once a week instead. Or if you have the opportunity to put something in a glass container, storage container after you're done cooking leftover food instead of putting it into plastic. These are all pretty simple tips.
Mm-hmm.
Again, you can't avoid plastic packaging in food entirely, and nor should you try, because I do think that's not available to most people, either time or economics wise. But intentional choices there, especially again for this kind of like a window of time, is something that has a pretty positive, helpful impact in reducing your exposure.
Yeah. And you focused on something that's very positive too in sharing that study, in that when you switched a choice or had less exposure, the body did a great job of getting rid of the BPA and the chemicals it was being exposed to. I find that's very hopeful for people to sort of say, hey, it really does make a difference to make these choices, you know, not every single day. Like, yes, I do mostly try to use like a glass or a stainless steel water bottle, but every once in a while I'm grabbing a plastic water bottle from the
Mm-hmm.
gas station or something like that. Like, you know, everything within reason. I usually use the study that showed in preteen girls where they dramatically changed their makeup and personal care use for, it was like 2 or 3 weeks, just looking at level of phthalates in their urine before and after, and what an amazing difference it is. Or even just people simply, you know, washing their fruits and vegetables when they come home and seeing levels of a lot of chemicals drop off, not necessarily spending a ton of money on organic or things. I mean, not not that that's not great too, but just these simple things that you can do can be so helpful, and pointing out that our bodies can do a good job of sort of resetting, I think is really hopeful to share. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, that's why there's a lot of incredible organs in our body that are working really hard behind the scenes. And especially for chemicals like BPA, phthalates, for example, they do leave the body, which is great because there are some chemicals that are fat loving that are really hard. They're persistent. They stay with us. But for those that, like, especially these plasticizers, many of these endocrine disruptors do leave our bodies quite quickly.
We're going to get back to learning more from Lindsay in just a minute, but I want to take a moment to thank you for being here. You being here and interacting with the show means so much. Take a minute to follow the show wherever you're listening so you don't miss our weekly episode all about reproductive health, wellness, and so many things that we are curious about. Be sure and rate the show wherever you're listening and leave a comment. Let us know what you find valuable and what you'd love to hear us talk about next. Now, let's get back to learning from Lindsay. How about for people that sort of say, well, I'm done with being pregnant. I'm done with, having children. Do I still have to care about these things? Like, how do you talk to those people? Is it something that we should still consider thinking about later in life, or should we only focus on it when we're trying to get pregnant or pregnant?
Great question. So there's two ways I want to answer that. The first is a lot of, think about it like an investment. Like, you try to eat healthy, you try to balance your stress, you try not to drink as much or at all. Exercising. These are all things that are kind of future investments in your health. And so the degree to which things ebb and flow, just like your exercise routine does, so does your kind of vigilance around controlling what sorts of toxic chemicals may or may not be coming into your home. And that's okay. Like, it's okay if it ebbs and flows. There is, especially for certain, like, people have a tendency to start to take more supplements as they get older. And especially those that are botanical in nature have high levels often, or they can have high levels of heavy metals. Heavy metals are directly linked to harming our brain, and healthy aging of our brain is also something we can think about and want to prioritize as we get older. So it's not just about our reproductive journey. There's a lot of life stages that are impacted by the exposures to different toxic chemicals or things like air pollution. And so I think the kind of priorities change over time. Mm-hmm. And then if you're in someone that has had to spend a tremendous amount of time and energy and effort, especially around our reproductive years, and you just want to turn off that part of your brain, I think that's okay. And then I would ask you to join the fight of calling your state and federal elected officials, because I think people are so focused on their personal health and their family, which I think I do not fault people for. But I keep telling people, in one of the cases I make in my book, is I want you to save enough energy for the fight. And the fight is to create these systemic changes that take this off of our list at all. And if people don't save enough energy for that shopping trip around Target where I can see all of the baby bottles are made without BPA, that kind of, those wins are so huge and really take the energy or the burden off of us. I really want people to make sure you're not missing the bigger piece, which is systemic change.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And I'd love to speak a little bit to your advocacy and your time as a lobbyist. And you have helped pass over 30 consumer safety laws in your time. And I'm curious if there's, one in particular that sort of sticks out to you that feels like a really good win, that it really can make a difference to, advocate and stay in the fight and do exactly what you're doing. Do you have any examples?
Oh, so many, Laura. It's funny because the more I do this work, people are like, oh, you must be so jaded. You've been working in this, like, dealing with politics and whatever, increasingly partisan Congress and electorate. And I actually get more hopeful the more I do this, because even despite how in the last 20 years things have gotten so polarized, still, even 2023 was another huge victory. I just testified in front of the state of California in support of a bill to require the transparency of heavy metal levels in prenatal vitamins, which has been passing unanimously every single committee. So this really shows that there's a ton of bipartisan support for these kind of bread and butter consumer safety issues. I would say that the win that I kind of stands out is when I shifted from doing state policy in Minnesota to moving to Washington, D.C. I worked for 6 years on federal reform of the big law. It's called the Toxic Substances Control Act. It's the main law that oversees chemical safety before chemicals hit the market. And at the time, it was so weak. It was passed in the 1970s that all of the 62,000 chemicals on the market in the 70s were just grandfathered in. So like, oh, don't worry about them. We're not going to ask if those are safe. And we'll we'll ask questions about things that are introduced after. But there was this big loophole that the EPA couldn't actually study chemicals for safety before they entered the marketplace. So it was more than 6 years. It was just 6 years that I was in DC for this big effort. And everyone was like, oh my gosh, a big, huge federal reform. There's no way this is going to happen. No way a single phone call matters. And what we did is we were super diligent. Over the course, we built this grassroots swell of support for updating this law. And in 2016, then President Obama signed into law an update to TSCA that ultimately helped fix so many of the flaws that in 2023, asbestos is now banned because the original law could not ban asbestos. And so it sounds shocking that asbestos wasn't banned until 2023. But the point is that we kind of countered a lot of people's skepticism that bipartisan big pieces of legislation couldn't get passed. And the only way we got it passed was because individual people like you and I picked up the phone twice a year to call our senators and say, hey, I don't want to be exposed to toxic chemicals.
Wow. That is a very hopeful and wonderful win. I love being reminded of that. Lindsay, you really do amazing work.
Oh,
really,
thank you.
Truly. You mentioned a little bit just how polarizing things are right now. We are recording this in the summer of 2025, and Trump is in office and Congress is really following things. I do not want to get too political, but can you just provide a little bit of hope for anybody that's feeling that even more now than in 2023, that what we do, might not make a difference when we're reaching out to people? Can you provide us a little hope here?
Happy to. My work has spanned many administrations and is always nonpartisan. And I truly believe there's space for everyone, regardless of political affiliation in this fight. And my one ask in both for now and also in my book is that regardless of our personal politics, we have to hold politicians accountable. Doesn't matter if we love them on everything else, we voted for them, or if we didn't. If someone you don't like in office does something that is a step forward to protect our health from toxic chemicals, great, call them and thank them. And likewise, if you voted for someone and they're proposing rollbacks, also hold them accountable. So one thing I will say, going back to the asbestos, because this is relevant. So in the early days, as we are, of the second term for President Trump, the EPA was for weeks threatening to roll back the 2023 asbestos ban, which is shocking. It took us that long to ban asbestos and then to even think about rolling it back or delay the implementation. And they've taken their foot off the gas of that because the public outrage was so much. And this was just a few weeks ago, where it looks like, at least for now, we're out of the woods and the asbestos rule is not going to be rolled back. But that wouldn't have happened if people wouldn't have been upset and made it very clear that these types of public health issues are politically potent, and we did. So that's a piece of hope from the kind of early days of when things were starting to look sketchy. And look, there's a lot of stuff that's still being rolled back or on the proposed chopping block, and we just have to pay attention and make sure that our voices are heard.
I agree, and I have had discussions with you outside of this podcast on our work on the board of Toxic Free Future, a fantastic advocacy group for doing exactly what we're talking about here. And we both agreed in that particular meeting the importance of discourse and that these are not partisan issues. This is family issues. And I do hope that that there can be discourse in the room, and that part of the MAHA movement is going to be really trying to help safety overall. And I choose to be hopeful, and I choose to stay in the discourse and keep talking and keep sharing. So just kind of that feeling like, oh my gosh, climate change is so overwhelming. No matter what I do, it's not going to change anything. Or, oh my gosh, all of these products that are on the shelves in our grocery store are all full of microplastics. I can't change anything. Like, I'm just going to give up. Feeling like, oh my gosh, the EPA is being dismantled, and, you know, we just have to give up. I don't believe that. And I love that you continue to do the work that you do. And we just have to keep our voices open and
Yep.
talking and reaching out. And I loved that I've never heard anyone say, thank your representative. I've always heard, you know, reach out with your complaints, but you are the first person I have ever heard say, hey, if they do something that you like, give them positive feedback and positive reinforcement. That is a great tip.
Yeah,
love
it
that.
goes so far. And again, it's because I have lobbied state and congressional staffers for decades now, and they never hear thank you. And when they do, they're like, oh, that was a good issue. Like, let's do more of that.
That is cool. All right, I'm going to take us back to going down the Target aisle or Walmart or wherever you are. And let's try and help that consumer, that listener that's sitting there and looking at all these different options of soap or lotion or laundry detergent, and trying to understand labels. What is this sort of greenwashing, you know, marketing to try to trick us into thinking that things might be better, even though it's just a word and it doesn't really have legislation behind it, or sort of can you teach us about labels and how to find things that are safer?
Yep. So a couple things I outline and I recommend in the back of my book. I have a pretty big take action section, which I like to say is not a to-do list. It's a menu of options. So like choose your path. Some certifications are really helpful to look for. And so I articulate in my book which of those certifications that I think have the most rigor behind them. So like in the cleaning aisle, looking for EPA safer choice. It's like one of the like tried and true. If you're looking at textiles, Okeotech certified, beauty and personal care, EWG verified and made safe. Like these certifications can really help kind of once you familiarize yourself, because I don't recommend that many. It's like a nice like shorthand when you're shopping. The second thing I will say is that Made Safe is a certification that spans beyond personal care. So they do have other, like when you're looking for baby crib mattresses and stuff like that, which I think is nice. So you can kind of check stuff out before you go into the store. And Skin Deep database by Environmental Working Group is still, I think, the best for personal care products. It ranks them on a scale from 1 to 10. There's a bunch of apps out there like the Yucca app or Think Dirty. I don't really love any of them. I do think the Skin Deep database and Clearia are the best, kind of most science-backed tools. But I think one of the best things you can do, again, this takes time, and time is a privilege, which is not lost on me. But, you know, don't overly sweat the moments when you're in the shopping, because oftentimes you're in a hurry. Mm-hmm. But for brands that you really do love, you can always email their customer service. At Ritual, my current day job, I am the recipient of all of those questions that come in that are related to safety or sustainability or certifications. And asking questions of those brands that you love of like, hey, how are you addressing toxic chemicals? Do you test for contaminants? I actually give questions to ask companies that are pre-drafted in the back of my book. Even if you don't understand, or if they never get back to you what the response is, just asking the question really helps move the needle, because companies track how many people are starting to ask us, oh, wait, are there PFAS or forever chemicals in this makeup or whatever the product may be? So in the same way that placing a phone call to an elected official has a lot of impact, so too does doing the info at insertfavoritecompany.com email also definitely has an impact as well.
Okay. That's really, really helpful. You you mentioned, and I think one of your most powerful arguments is about perfectionism and guilt. Can you talk a little bit more about that as someone who can really relate?
Yes. I lovingly create personas for these different factions that I've kind of seen emerge over the years. And the whole point, and I say this in my book, is like you might see yourself in all of these personas. So I say that before I talk about the perfectionists. But the perfectionists, I think people get really energized and passionate about this topic when they learn about it. And I will take passion all day long. The problem is that it becomes this, for some people, it's like an obsession or a focus on control of things that there's so much we can't control that what they try to control everything they bring into their home. But I think that's unfair that we've asked, especially women, to be in that position, to be that vigilant for the safety of your health and your family. And I want people to, again, save energy for these bigger things like placing a phone call to help pass laws, because there's limits to what companies can do.
Okay.
Even the cleanest company out there, there's limitations to how clean they can make their products if you've got a regulatory environment where there's not transparency of the supply chain, for example. So I really want people to kind of like focus on that it's actually not about perfecting this like bubble of a house, because that's not possible. You have to be able to trust both your body and doing the best you can. As you know, stress is also not good for your body. And you have to be able to balance all of these things. And so again, the longer I work on this topic, people will say like, oh, I don't want you to come over to my house. I have plastic. I'm like, so do I. Like, come over to my house. Like, again, I say this all the time, but like, I have Cheetos in my pantry. Like, it's not, whatever. Or a great example, especially having come from the beauty industry. I was on a work trip and I ran out of my brow pencil, and I went to CVS and I got a drugstore one. It did not have any of these certifications. And it's like, who cares? I'm going to use it. It's a brow pencil. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, just take the pressure off of yourself, because we've got so much that is being asked of us right now. This should not be on the top of our to-do list. So I just don't think guilt and perfectionism is something that it's not another burden that we should have to take on. And you can make tremendous strides to protect yourself and your family without absolutely killing yourself.
Yeah. I really appreciate that, especially for my patients that are struggling to conceive and they already feel so out of control of their family building timeline, their body not doing what they thought it always would be, and trying to take back control with living this perfect, in air quotes, lifestyle, and trying to eliminate toxins as part of that. It can truly be overwhelming. So giving yourself a little bit of a space, a little forgiveness of actually that drugstore brow pencil that you just talked about might have been an amazing product, and maybe you keep buying that. And then other choices that you have, like lotion you're putting all over your body, you might choose something that is a little bit verified and a little bit less toxic. So I think we both share that message, and that's one of the reasons I really appreciated your book, because there's so much out there right now that is, educating, but in a very alarmist way, like so many ways that people on social media or in general media are gaining attention is putting out fear, telling people the problem that they have and then selling them the solution. Your book, your advocacy, so much of the work that you've done is highlighting issues that we have, but not in a fearful way, providing solutions, but in a forgiving way. And I think that that's a very powerful message that often doesn't get highlighted like it should. And I'm glad that you're doing what you're doing.
Thank you. One of the things that I've been witnessing, and I know you have as well, is that, well, and what I kind of say in my book is that social media is actually one of the most toxic things in our home. And the reason for that is we've got algorithms that not only prioritize and then help promote these kind of salacious clickbait headlines. Yes, it's all about what you fear, But now what we've seen in the age of social media misinformation is we've got what seem to be credible accounts because maybe someone does have an advanced degree in an area of science, even if it's not, almost 99% of the time, it has not been a related field of science of environmental health, experts in the study of toxic chemicals, but saying the opposite, which is what I've heard the chemical industry say for years now, which is the dose makes the poison. This is all fear mongering. Stop scaring women. Like, pregnant moms don't need to worry about X, Y, or Z. And that's also harmful because the nuance of this issue is in the middle. And guess what? Some of the amazing scientists that I feature in my book, they don't have social media accounts that they're, manning all day. And so we've got like everything now is getting polarized by social media. And so a lot of you could take this steps further, especially when you think about a lot of your work, Lora, which is these like ideas and concepts of what it means to have a perfect pregnancy or perfect, like all this stuff is like toxic in a lot of ways. And I ask people to buy less stuff, bring less things into your home, turn off social media. I'm not asking you to delete your apps. Great if you do. I still have mine. Like, spend less time on your phone on social media and focus on the connection and human connection that we've shockingly just kind of like lost touch of how quickly our lives have been kind of taken over by our devices. And I don't mean this to sound analog in any way, but it actually does directly impact the information that you're taking in, and will allow you to make better choices and be kind of clear-headed about where you want to prioritize the types of like toxic chemical exposures in your home that you want to reduce.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. There is such a void of knowing who to trust right now in many different aspects of, politicians and in medicine and on social media. And that's one of the reasons that I think you and I are out there educating a little bit is because if we aren't out there talking and educating, then all these other really loud voices kind of do win. And so I love highlighting what you're doing because it is based in science and evidence and decades of lobbyists and working with people to not only help that person who is in Target trying to decide between two different products, but also who wants to help on a deeper level and like really change the narrative. And when people sometimes talk to me about like, oh my gosh, well, it doesn't matter if I reach out to my senator. It doesn't even matter if I vote. I sometimes will highlight other countries that are doing things a little bit differently and sort of teach a little bit about that. I'd love for you to speak to kind of the differences between policies and even just the products that you buy. Let's just use Europe as an example compared to the US and why it's so different.
Yep. So back in the early 2000s, the European Union passed a piece of legislation that's called REACH, looking at the safety of ingredients in personal care products. And, this is it was 20 years ago that REACH was first enacted, which is hard to believe. And they have a list of over 1,500 chemicals that aren't allowed to be used in personal care products. The list is still a partial, not full out restriction, is around 30 in the United States, for example. And this is even still true with the big update to cosmetic safety laws that we helped pass in 2023 after a decade of working. And I think, a lot of people, like the critics and dismissers, are like, oh, but there's rocket fuel on the EU's list. It's like, yes, okay, so not every single, I didn't write the list, obviously, but like, the point still holds true that the European Union has restricted more known harmful ingredients from personal care products than the United States. And that is mostly because of the will of, the European consumer market, and the electorate was much more kind of hip to these issues before we were. And I will say that as this issue has gained popularity, we've been able to pass some of these big pieces of legislation like TSCA, like updating cosmetic safety laws. We've got work to go and to do, but the reason that we were able to make some of those instrumental shifts here in the United States was because people called their members of Congress. And let's not forget that some of the strongest laws have really come out of the states, including Washington State, and Toxic Free Future that you mentioned, the board that we sit on. They've been able to pass incredible legislation that even if it's passed in the state of Washington, or Minnesota passes a law, California, it becomes a de facto national standard, because manufacturers are not going to create a separate set of products for the state of California and then sell other products to the other states. And so the combination of the state and federal passage of all these laws is really because, again, grassroots people like you and I have been picking up the phone and sending emails.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. I love that. Any tips for people that are listening right now and saying, oh my goodness, I would like to figure out how to help on a different level? Do you have any websites or resources for people to check out?
Yes. So Toxic Free Future, as I mentioned, is like the best kind of one-stop shop. There's also a website that is connected to Toxic Free Future called Safer States, and it's a great tracker of what's happening in each state. With the exception of California, the majority of state legislatures right now are not in session, but certainly when they're in session, you can kind of see what's happening in your state and how to get involved, which I love, connecting you to organizations locally. And then just this week, there was the Safer Beauty Bill package was reintroduced into Congress, something I cover in my book, which is basically a suite of 4 different bills that would help kind of close some of these gaps in our federal cosmetic safety legislation. So lots of great stuff happening. The state of California is no exception. Like I mentioned, the prenatal bill that I'm working on, as well as some other kind of good movement on PFAS in the state of California as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I will be sure to put links to all of the resources that you mentioned, including Made Safe and EWG. And I would love for people to be able to find you and find your book. So where can we find you?
Thank you. My book is available anywhere is sold, which is great. So whatever's easiest for you makes a huge impact, especially as a first-time author. The more kind of early sales that happen helps unlock bigger distribution, because people don't know how whether or not this issue is going to resonate. So thank you for your support. I'm also on Substack, which is a great way for me to reach my audience. And I'm also on Instagram, Lindsay_Dahl.
Perfect. Oh, thank you so much for being here today, Lindsay. Just really appreciate all you shared.
Thank you for having me. And I always appreciate how you handle these topics with such care and nuance.
Thank you. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I absolutely loved reconnecting with Lindsay and gaining even more knowledge from her, someone I admire for her advocacy, her education, and her willingness to teach without perfectionism, without guilt. So many wonderful tips in this book. You have got to check it out. Cleaning House by Lindsay Dahl. We're going to be sure and put links in the description below to all of the different things that we were talking about today, lists of safer products, advocacy groups, and of course, Lindsay's book, Cleaning House. Thank you again for being here today. Be sure and follow the show wherever you're listening. You can learn more and interact on Instagram, on YouTube, TikTok, and my website, drlorashahine.com. Thank you so much to my team at Audiotocracy for producing another wonderful show. And until next week, stay brave and curious.